All right, today we're going to look at political change in a totally new way. We're going way past the daily headlines to ask, is there a kind of science to this stuff? A science to how political systems rise and fall? Well, it's a field called pattern geodynamics, so let's jump right in. This is a huge question, right? And it's probably on your mind a lot, especially when everything feels so unpredictable. Can we actually predict a country's future? I'm talking about forecasting huge political shifts, like a country moving towards democracy or sliding the other way into autocracy. Before it happens. It sounds a little like sci-fi, I know, but the answer is surprisingly, well, it's more yes than you'd probably guess. Okay, so think about what we see on the news every single day. It just looks like chaos, right? Protests erupting here, a surprise election result there, leaders doing things you just can't predict. But what if you zoom out? What if you look at the data behind all that noise? A totally different picture starts to take shape. All that chaos starts to look like clear patterns. Those protests, they become measurable pressures. And those one-off elections, they start to look like points along predictable pathways. All right, so how on earth do we actually do this? Well, the big idea, the key, is to completely change how we think about politics. We have to stop seeing it as just a bunch of random events and start seeing it for what it is, a complex system, kind of like the weather. Yeah, it's huge, it's complex, sure, but it's also a system, and it's governed by forces and rules we can actually measure. And if meteorologists can learn to forecast the weather, maybe we can do something similar for politics. I mean, think about it. A weather forecast isn't just looking at the wind, right? It's pulling in data on temperature, atmospheric pressure, humidity, all these different fields. This model does the exact same thing, but for politics. It's measuring how a country's institutions, its economy, and all those social movements are interacting with each other, kind of pushing and pulling, creating the political weather. Okay, so if we're going to be political weather forecasters, what exactly are we measuring? What are the variables? The analysis we're looking at boils it down to 5 key ingredients. Think of these as the atmospheric conditions of a political system. Here they are: regime quality, elite cohesion, socioeconomic stress, public mobilization, and external factors. These are the 5 big ones the model tracks. You can almost picture them as the mean dials on our political weather dashboard. Each one tells us something crucial, and when you look at them all together, you get a real picture of a country's stability. Let's go through them one by one. First up, we've got regime quality and institutional constraints. Think of this as the basic material of the state. It's the bedrock. How strong are the institutions? Like, is there a court that can actually overrule the president? Is there a free media, or does one person just call all the shots? This is so important because it tells you how brittle or flexible the state is. When pressure starts to build, a flexible system can bend. A brittle one, it just might snap. Next, number 2, elite cohesion and state capacity. This is all about the people at the top, the political leaders, the military brass, the big economic players. Are they all working together, or are they at each other's throats? Believe it or not, a divided elite is one of the single best predictors of major political change. Why? Well, because when the folks in charge are busy fighting each other, the state basically loses its ability to handle a crisis. It's a huge red flag. Third, and this one is a really big one, socioeconomic stress. This is the pressure that builds up from the general population. When things like inflation, unemployment, or even just the price of food start to spike, that stress doesn't just stay in people's bank accounts. It translates almost directly into political pressure on the people in charge. Number 4 is mobilization and contention. This is the stuff we actually see on the news every day. The surface weather, if you will. How many people are out in the streets protesting? Are there strikes? Is the opposition getting organized? This variable is all about measuring that active, visible discontent. And finally, number 5, information and external links. Because, no country's an island, right? Here, we're looking at everything from the flow of information. Is the media open, or is it just state propaganda? All the way to the flow of money and power. Is another country propping the government up with aid? Are sanctions putting on pressure? Is there a war happening next door? All these global currents can totally change the local political weather. Okay, so now we have our 5 key ingredients. We're measuring the political temperature, the pressure, the wind speed, all of it. But the million-dollar question is, how do we know when the storm is actually about to break? Well, that's when we have to look for the signs that the system is getting close to a tipping point. And this is absolutely crucial. Forecasters aren't looking for just one single thing to go wrong. They're looking for a combination of things, a perfect storm of pressures. So like you see here,
When you get rising economic stress, plus the elites are starting to split, and you have mass protests growing all at the same time, that's when all the red warning lights should be flashing. It's that convergence, that perfect storm, that tells you the system is getting really, really unstable.
And one of the classic warning signs, a really dangerous one, is this kind of feedback loop. You see it all the time. Mass protests start, so the state tries to crack down. But instead of scaring people off, the repression just makes more people angry, and they join the protests, which get even bigger. Then the state cracks down harder, and it just escalates. It's this vicious cycle that experts call a runaway coupling, and it can spiral out of control incredibly fast.
Now, as a system gets really close to that edge, it often starts to do something fascinating. It begins to flicker. It's a huge tell. One day, the government might try offering concessions, trying to calm everyone down.
And then literally the next day, it completely reverses course and launches a massive crackdown. This whiplash, this rapid switching back and forth between concession and crackdown, it's a giant sign that the system is deeply unstable. The people in charge are losing their grip, just desperately trying anything to find a stability that, frankly, might not exist anymore.
So let's say the system hits its tipping point. The storm breaks. Now what? What happens next? Well, this model is so cool because it doesn't just try to predict if a big change is coming, it also helps forecast what kind of change we're likely to see. And that brings us to these different pathways of change. And this table just lays it out so clearly. Depending on all those initial conditions we talked about, how strong the state is, whether elites are unified, you can get totally different kinds of political weather. For example, a stable democracy might just see some light showers, small, gradual reforms. But a system with tons of pressure and huge protests, that could trigger a thunderstorm, a massive event that forces a complete redesign of the Constitution. And a really weak state with divided elites, that's when you might face a hurricane, a total breakdown, maybe even a coup or civil conflict.
Now, it's really important to remember that while the ingredients for political weather are the same everywhere, the long-term climate is different all over the world. So the same forces can produce very different results in, say, North America than they would in the Middle East.
And this chart here gives you a little taste of those regional climates. You can see how certain types of change, certain pathways, are just more common in different parts of the globe. For example, that high contention pathway, the one driven by huge protests, is a really common pattern in Latin America. Now, that doesn't mean it's the only thing that happens there, of course, but knowing these historical patterns helps make the forecasts a lot more accurate.
And really, all of this brings us to the central idea of this whole model. And this quote from the source material just says it perfectly. A political pathway is a state-dependent corridor. It emerges when the system's control variables move into the parameter range where that corridor becomes stable. What that means is, a pathway isn't destiny. It's not set in stone. It's more like a corridor of possibility that suddenly opens up when all those things we've been measuring, the institutions, the economic stress, the protests, all line up in just the right way. And just as quickly as it opens, that corridor can close again when the conditions change.
So, next time you're watching the news, try this. Don't just see the chaos on the surface. Try to think like a forecaster. Look for those interacting forces. Look for the pressure that's building up under the surface. And try to spot the pathways that might be opening up. Because the big takeaway here is that this isn't just some abstract academic idea. It's a really powerful new framework for understanding the world around us. So it leaves us with one final question. What political weather is gathering where you live?